Good afternoon, all. Welcome to this webinar session in conjunction with Runecast and Fortum IT. I'm Lee David, and I'm also followed and joined by Kev Johnson. Kev?
Hi there, Lee. How are you doing?
Yep, all good, thank you. All good, thank you.
Great stuff.
So it's a proud moment to be working in conjunction with Runecast. Myself, I'm Technical Account Director at Fortum IT. And security and risk and compliance is very prevalent in the market, protecting your brand. And I like to lead with delivering innovative, disruptive technology to our clients. And today, I'm happy to be joined by Kev, who is going to do a presentation on Runecast, on how we can actually mitigate those risks and also protect your companies from potential breaches and untoward, undetected misconfiguration. So I'll hand over to Kev Johnson, who will carry out a demonstration.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And you know, it's a presentation. I've tried to keep it as interesting as possible. There's a few memes in there, but mostly it's going to be live demos. So I'm going to run through a whole bunch of different things, some different kind of scenarios where Runecast Analyzer can really help. There'll be time at the end for a Q&A. So if you want to, if you've got any questions that pop up, if you want to pop them into the Q&A, we'll deal with them at the end. We've got loads of time at the end for that. This isn't going to take all day, believe me.
Perfect. Thank you.
So there we go. Okay, so just a brief introduction to myself. I'm a systems engineer at Runecast Solutions. So I do a whole bunch of things, but mostly I spend a lot of time speaking to our customers, talking about, you know, all of the various different problems that we can really help with. And my background, so prior to Runecast, I worked for VMware. I was the technical marketing architect for vSphere Lifecycle for about 1.5 years there. That was a good, fun, exciting little journey. Prior to that, I headed up a team of consultants for a reseller in the north of England for about 7 years. And then prior to that, I was a sysadmin. So I'm a time-served sysadmin. I've worked help desk. I know all about the horrible things that happen that mean that you lose your weekends, you lose your evenings. And we really want to help you get that time back, basically. So a reference that is probably going to be lost on a lot of people, and normally when I do this, you know, at least 50% of the people on the webinar are from across the pond, so they have no idea what this is. And I get some interesting guesses, but security and compliance, they're like birds of a feather, and that's the reference basically for anyone who's not my age. So yeah, the birds of a feather, they're related, but they're not the same. So security is not compliance. You can be secure and not compliant. You can be 100% compliant but not secure. But what you need to do is have this visibility. You need to know what's going on in your environment, and that's something that Runecast Analyzer can really help with. So something else to bear in mind is what was secure today, what was secure yesterday isn't necessarily going to be secure tomorrow and into the future. So you need to have that visibility as to what your compliance state was, you know, maybe 6 months ago. And you need to be able to also see when you start drifting outside of what you determine to be that compliant state. Excuse me. So this is a screenshot from a VMware security advisory that was published a little earlier this year. And the specific security advisory addresses an issue whereby an attacker that had direct network access to your vCenter server. So that just means that they're located on the same network. So they might have got through your firewall. There might be, there might be an internal threat or whatever. But what this vulnerability meant was, without having any credentials with on your vCenter server, they could essentially give themselves full admin privileges. And that, as you can imagine, was a major issue. And that's why it's got this maximum CVSSV3 score of 10. So it was really important. It was patched very quickly. You had to make sure you applied those patches, obviously. But all of these things, there's new information coming out all of the time. And the problem with all of this information is it's all kind of located in places that nobody reads until they've been hit by a problem. So either they've had a breach, or maybe there's been some kind of outage in their systems. And the idea behind Runecast was that what we would do is build this tool that monitors all of these different sources of data all of these industry best practices standards, the security standards, the VMware knowledge base, CIS standards for AWS. So we've got a whole bunch of coverage for AWS. So yeah, we scan your environments proactively and match against any of these issues. So we can tell you about them before you have your outage. You can
and I think that's also a big, obviously a plus in terms of running Runecast, because, technically lots of clients out there, go through pen testings, pen test, which happens once every 12 months. And then throughout that period, things change, the estate evolves, things patched untoward, and that's a big driver.
Absolutely. And I mean, the thing is, you have your annual pen test, and that just means that you were secure at the point that the pen test happened. And typically what we see happen is people book a pen test, and they know it's happening, so they spend a lot of time locking down all the things that should have been locked down in the first place anyway. And then the pen test happens, and then stuff starts to drift away from that secure baseline. And so you become more and more vulnerable over time until a few weeks before next year's pen test, or a few weeks before next year's PCI audit, or whatever standards you're working towards. So having that visibility year round and being able to see when you are drifting out of compliance or away from what your desired state is super important. So one of the things I do want to also call out, though, is that compliance baselines are just that. They're just a baseline. They're a way to measure, what your exposure is based on what you determine to be important, or what the industry you're working in determines to be important. And one of the other things that Runecast is working on, and we'll see that so this is actually the first time we've announced this, one of the things that's going to be launched towards the end of this month is the concept of having custom profiles. So the idea that you can take a little bit of PCI DSS, a little bit of DSysTig, a little bit of NIST, and you can smash all of that together and build your own security standard that meets what you determine to be the method that you want to measure yourself against. So I like to get a few memes in. I don't think there's any cat memes in this one, which is a shame, really. But there are many security compliance standards. Choose the ones that are relevant to you. Don't try and measure yourself against DSysTig, PCI DSS, NIST, HIPAA, all of the other different ones. Choose the ones that are relevant. Stick to those. Otherwise, you're never going to sleep. Let's put it that way. You've got a lot of work to do. There's a lot of overlap between each of them. But each one does things in slightly different ways for obvious reasons. So in terms of security compliance frameworks, so what we at Runecast Analyzer can handle is DSysTig. So we've got DSysTig 6. We get this updated, I think it's once a quarter. So every time there's an update to the DSys standard, we push this down into the appliance. We're covering PCI DSS 321 for those of you who are handling things like processing payment cards. We've got HIPAA for the healthcare industry. We've got BSI, which is probably going to be less well known in the UK, but if you're doing business with German federal customers, BSI is super important. We've got CIS, so the Center for Internet Security, and we actually do a lot of work alongside CIS. So we are CIS certified for both VMware and also for AWS. We've got NIST, so the US federal standards. So if you're doing business with any kind of US federal customers, then NIST is likely to be at least partly applicable. And then we've got the VMware Security Configuration Guide. So this is a thing. I probably spent 2 years as a consultant doing nothing but going around government organizations and running through the VMware Security Configuration Guide, hardening the environment, making sure it was fit for purpose, it wasn't going to be breached. And I just used to do that. It used to take forever because there was no easy way to measure compliance against it. So you'd always kind of have to start and just run through everything. But these are our baselines. We can use one, we can use many, but if you're going to use many, please make sure that you need to use many. This guy, I mean, I've been a consultant, I've been a sysadmin, and this guy always pops up 3 weeks before there's an audit. And what that means is basically everyone loses their evenings, everyone loses their weekends, because you've got to nail everything down because it's drifted away from that compliance standard that you decided to measure against. So what we want to know is, how do we avoid this guy? So one of the ways that we could do this is we could pick up the standards that we're interested in. We could read that relevant framework, we could digest it, we can map it to our environment, because each one of these standards is not written specifically for your environment. It's not even written specifically for the technology that you're using. It's just written from a very, very generic technology agnostic perspective. We then need to create some controls. So we need to be able to say, okay, well, this is how we're going to manage these specific aspects of the standard. We need to document the approach, because if you haven't got documentation, good luck passing that audit. And also good luck making things right if things go wrong. And then you pay for the auditors to come out and they check your environment out and everything goes swimmingly and you pass first time. I mean, realistically, a lot of organizations don't. And in fact, one of our biggest customers, they're based in Germany, they were having some real problems with PCI DSS compliance. And this is why they actually bought Runecast Analyzer in the first place. They bought us for PCI DSS compliance, and they scanned their environment, they found a whole bunch of problems, they remediated those problems, and then they got the auditors in and they passed first time. So that, you know, it paid for itself just by doing that. But then they discovered all of this extra stuff that we could do for them as well. So, you know, they're a great customer of ours, and they're great fun to work with as well. But yeah, so if you're going to do all of that, just bear in mind, for example, and PCI DSS is just an example. All of the other standards are similar in length and how much they're likely to put you to sleep. So PCI DSS 321 is 139 pages, 54,565 words. You know, if you're going to do that for fun, then maybe you want to consider a job as an auditor, because it's not fun. So, as I mentioned earlier, these are the things that Runecast Analyzer is kind of designed to help you with. 90% of issues within a VMware software-defined data center are caused by non-issues. So these issues are documented. There's stuff out there that tells you, this, if you're running in this specific configuration with this version of this software and these firmwares, etc., then you're going to run into this problem. But nobody reads it until they run into the problem. So we want to help you be more proactive and spend less time troubleshooting and more time, you get that time back to go home at the end of the day, to have your weekends. And, if you've got a little bit more free time, then you can carry on doing things like delivering business value, which is super important. And I've probably covered all of this stuff. So we cover vSphere, we cover vSphere from 5.0 all the way up to 7, and we'll have support for 7 update 1 as soon as that ships out the door from VMware. We cover vSAN, we cover NSXV with NSXT coming later this year, and we also cover Horizon. So that's the VMware stack that we handle. We also cover a whole bunch of different services on AWS as well. So, if you're moving towards that kind of hybrid cloud, or even you've got workloads that are running fully in the public cloud, then we can really help you with your security compliance needs at that point. So we do configuration analysis. We're scanning vCenter, we're scanning your ESXi hosts, we're looking for how everything's configured. We're looking at advanced system configurations. We're checking the interrelationships between these various different configurations, and then we flag up these issues to you. We do log analysis, so we also monitor what's going on in syslog. So from that perspective, we've got the information that's coming from the configuration, but we can't always detect everything from the configuration only. Sometimes we have to wait for a log that comes out, and we see the entries in the syslog, and we can then correlate them against the knowledge base, and we can correlate them against best practices, and we can show you what you need to do in order to get rid of those problems. Again, ideally, before you suffer an outage or a breach. And we do all of this in an automated fashion. So you just set a scan schedule and you run, it runs once a day, once an hour, whatever you need. And then you've got all of that visibility all year round. And as soon as you start drifting out of compliance, you're going to be able to see it very, very easily. And I'll show you that very shortly. So from a security perspective, complexity is a real problem. And we always think, if you think about how you design and how you architect security around a problem, you wrap it in firewalls, you build policies, you install antivirus, all of these things, you install certificates. All of these things make things more secure, maybe, yeah, okay, so they do, but also they add complexity. And that means, unless you know exactly what's going on, it's really hard to troubleshoot when things go wrong. And, if you're suffering from a breach and you're not really sure, are these firewall rules correct? I mean, when did you last delete a firewall rule? Do you need that firewall rule? Nobody ever really makes these changes, and you just get more and more and more complex, and it makes it harder to troubleshoot. So we give you an example of this. So typically, when I first started out in the IT industry, I was going to be a web designer. And I mean, I wasn't a very good web designer, let's put it that way. That's why I ended up working in infrastructure. But what we did was we kind of start with something like this, and we write a hello world application, and then we publish it and we go, okay, great. Even with no documentation, even I, the terrible web designer, can understand what's going on here. So yeah, it's good. Everything starts off simple. You might even write some documentation, but you probably won't. But it's okay because we can see what's going on. However, before you know it, you're jacked into the matrix, and now nobody has a clue what's going on here. And you know, in a situation where in a situation where you have a breach or you have a system down, you really don't want to be looking at this kind of thing, because it's impossible to get yourself out of that hole at that point. So what we're looking to bring you is visibility and clarity, so you can see exactly what's going on in your environment. And you know, we've got this super simple dashboard, and I'm going to show you that. I'm going to show you that now, in fact. So this is the Runecast Analyzer. This is what it looks like. Basically, it's a web interface. It's a virtual appliance that lives on premises within your data center. So all of the value that you can get out, all of the analysis that you get out of the appliance, it's running in an appliance on your data center. There's no cloud services. You're not sending any data out to you know, any services that you might not necessarily be able to trust. Everything stays within your control. And we show you very easily, you know, the number of configuration issues that we're seeing broken down by severity, and also where in the layer, where in the stack where we're seeing these issues. We also show you any issues that we're coming up with from syslog. Now, at present, there's been no issues this week come up from syslog, but I'm sure I can find some a little later to show you. We show you how many VMware knowledge base articles are applicable. So we've got 94 in this environment, which is not a good number. And also, it's even worse because that number is ticking up. We're hitting 51% security compliance, 54% best practice adoption. Now, the security compliance, the reason we're hitting 51%, I can show you, is because I've done exactly what I told you not to do. I've basically got all of the standards that we can check for turned on at once. So there's a lot of crossover on all of these things, but typically what we would see happen is you would come in here and you might select PCI DSS if that's relevant, or CIS if if you're working towards the CIS standards, and all of that stuff. If you're running SAP HANA for vSphere, again, we can provide you with best practices there. If you've got pure storage, so if you've got a pure storage array in your environment, we'll automatically detect that you've got pure storage arrays in there, and we'll provide you with best practices analysis for that as well. All of this is licensed out of the box. So there's no, you don't need to buy an extra module for CIS or for SAP HANA. You just need to come in and turn the features on that you're interested in. Something else that we've got that's kind of cool, actually, let me show you this, is we've got this plugin for the vSphere client. So when I was a vSphere administrator, I used to have roughly, I'd maybe have 8 gig of RAM in my desktop, and 7 gig of that RAM would be taken up by Chrome because I'd have about 150 web browser tabs, and I could never find anything that I needed. So what we did with that in mind is we built this plugin, and this plugin gives you a widget within the vSphere client, and it works for the Flex client and also the HTML5 client. And it gives you all of this information that we can see from the Runecast interface, but it puts it front and center for you within the vSphere client. So here we've selected this vCenter server, but we could equally select, I don't know, let's select this compute cluster, and then we'll see, we should see some things update there. I've got no information in there, not sure what's going on there. Let's try the San Francisco data center. And of course, this is the joy of live demos. Everything goes wrong. Let's go back here then. We'll go back to the vCenter server. I think I've run out of memory in my lab, but here we go. So we can see at the vCenter level, we're missing out on 30 best practices. So we can drill through into that. And again, without having to leave the vSphere client, we can see what's going on. So we can see, we've got a problem with the NTP service not running. And if we look at affected objects, we can see it's these 3 ESXi hosts here. They've not got NTP configured, or they've got it configured, but it's not running, and it's not set to start on when the host boots up. All of these things are bad things in your environment, because if NTP is not running, troubleshooting is impossible because your log timestamps are all over the place. It also means you've got problems with things like anything that involves cryptography. So anything with certificates, you're going to have problems if there's no NTP. So we're looking to really help flag all of this stuff up so you can fix it before it becomes an issue. But again, we can look at the knowledge base, if there's anything specifically from the VMware knowledge base. We've got a load of VMware security advisories in here, and we've got all of this data within the appliance. Jump back to the web client.
That's really useful, Kev, because quite a few of my clients also, they run their daily server checks. They're investing, 2 to 3 hours in the morning running through and checking each one of these intrinsic components that are compliant. This automates, that, and obviously potentially frees up a significant amount of time.
It does. And honestly, you always give that job to like a junior sysadmin or like a help desk engineer or something like that. And, it's kind of one of the rites of passage is you just get all of these awful jobs. They have to be done, but they're no fun. They take forever. They're really boring. So if we can take that away from you and just say, okay, well, let's have a look. Let's just have a quick look at our all issues view. So the all issues view actually, as you might imagine, it shows you all of the issues. And we can see here, we've got some bad stuff happening recently because each one of these sets of dots represents a scan that's happened. So typically we're going to do one of these a day, but it seems that at some point, the 17th, that's today. So at some point this morning, someone's just been going in and clicking analyze now. So we can do these scans on a scheduled basis, but we can also do one that, on demand at any point in time. But what we can see is if we look kind of back here on the 15th, the number of issues that we saw was significantly fewer than the number of issues that we're seeing right now. So as soon as you see these kind of creeping spikes, you know that you're drifting away from compliance and you've got work to do. So you can nip these things in the bud rather than wait for them to become a massive issue, and then you've got to deal with them at that point. So the graph's kind of helpful. It shows us when we're drifting away from compliance, but also we can do filtering here. So in this environment, we've got 3 different vCenter servers. We've got a Horizon connection server and also an AWS account. We can filter based on the severity. So maybe we've just got a lot of stuff that we need to deal with, like we have in this environment actually, and we only actually want to focus on the criticals. So let's filter everything else out, and we're just going to look at the criticals. And the problem we've got there is, we've still got 578 things that we need to deal with. We can look at various different sources of data. So we can look at just data that's come from the knowledge base, from best practices, from security hardening guides, or any of the various different standards. We can look at where in the stack it's going to apply, which of the design characteristics. This is kind of standard AMPRS stuff. So if you're speaking to an architect, these are the things that they should be aware, they should be thinking of when they're designing a system. So maybe one of the things that we see quite often is, we need to do a report of all of the critical security issues that we have. So we've got the critical filter applied, we've got the security filter applied now, and we can see, okay, great. So we're now down from 500 something to 300 something. And then we can finally filter on all of the various different products that we provide coverage for. Once we've done that, we can chuck out a list of, we can build a report and we can kick it out to a PDF or to a CSV. And it looks pretty much like this. So these are all of the issues that we've got. There's also an option to also show you each object that is impacted by these. But we always show you the number of affected objects as well. So we can see we've got some issues here. We've got vulnerability in Apache struts for vCenter server. So that was a major issue back when it happened. And yeah, believe me, there's still people out there running vCenter 6 that could potentially be vulnerable there. We've got vulnerabilities for the branch target injection vulnerability. So this is an Intel speculative execution vulnerability that you're probably going to be vulnerable to until you apply some patches and then you make some configuration changes. There's lots in here, and realistically, what you want to be able to do is show to your management team that, okay, we've got whatever number of issues that we've got when we first deploy Runecast Analyzer, but we want to see this trend coming down. We want to see it drifting towards 0, and then we want to see it staying there as well. So yeah, that's another one of the really, really important aspects there. But if I just take these filters off, I'll give you an example or some examples of the things that we find regularly. So if we look here, we've got a purple screen of death, that Apache struts vulnerability, there's a lot of purple screens of death, and they're caused by all kinds of different things. But we're always going to show you, okay, well, in this case, we can see that it's these specific ESXi hosts that are affected, and it's because they're running these CPUs. and this specific version of ESXi. So if you're running those CPUs, then there's probably a vulnerability. It's one of these Intel security vulnerabilities. So what you need to do is get in touch with your hardware vendor, get a BIOS update, because you're not, the version of the BIOS that you're running is not protecting you against these specific vulnerabilities. We can look at the same information from the inventory perspective. I'm not going to spend too long in here. This is helpful in larger environments if you want to look specifically at maybe one specific vCenter server, or even a specific cluster, or just see what where your problems are. But it's also really helpful if you want to get a view as to maybe there's been a new VMware security advisory published, and you want to see what your exposure is. Or maybe let's use L1TF. So layer 1 terminal fault was a fairly major Intel security vulnerability a couple of years ago now. So if we just key in L1TF, and we can see immediately where our exposure is. And then from here, we can say, okay, well, we've got these ESXi hosts in this cluster. Each one of them has got 2 findings. We click on one of them, and then we can go straight to the details. And the details tell us everything that we need to know in order to be able to resolve these issues. So we're doing on time. Yeah, okay. Config KB. So I've kind of shown you the config KB side of things, because that was most of the stuff that I was showing you in the all issues view. But again, we've got purple screen of death with an issue with the receive side scaling plugin cleanup engine. So this is to do with the load balancing on a virtual distributed switch. It's a known issue in vSphere 6.7 and is resolved in 6.7 update 2. So we can check, we can say, okay, right, well, we've got these ESXi hosts here. They're running ESXi 6.7, so they're potentially vulnerable. They're running a build that is prior to 6.7 update 2, so they're also definitely likely to be vulnerable. And also we can check the configuration of the actual NICs themselves. So if the RSS load balancing feature is set to true, then you're vulnerable to this issue. There's 2 ways of dealing with this. We can either patch to 6.7 update 2 or higher, or we can configure these 2 network cards to have the RSS load balancing feature disabled. Either one of these would remove the risk of the purple screen of death, but obviously the second one is a workaround because there's a performance impact there as well. Best practices. So we've got best practices. Typically we spend a lot of time talking around vSphere best practices. We've also got best practices for SAP HANA. I mentioned earlier about Pure Storage, VMware Horizon. There's a bunch of AWS services as well, so EC2, S3, VPC, IAM, all of those kind of things. And again, we're scanning your entire environment, so anything that we show you in here is going to be relevant to your environment. We're not showing you anything that's, if you've not got any Horizon servers, you're not going to see anything about Horizon in here. From a security compliance perspective, this is where it gets super interesting, really. So if you're looking, typically what we're going to see out of the box is the VMware Security Configuration Guide, the VMware Guidelines. The VMware Hardening Guide has long been a target that people look towards when they're looking to improve the security in their environment. And there's a whole bunch of advice in here for NSX as well as for vSphere. And we're showing you all of these things. We've got things like ESXi hosts that don't have persistent logging configured. If you don't have persistent logging, then the next time that host reboots, all of those logs are gone. That's not helpful from a troubleshooting perspective or from a forensics perspective as well. NSXV, again, remote logging. So logging is super important, and we need to make sure we've got all these things configured. SSH. There's a number of customers that I speak to who, they despite the fact that the best practice is that you should not run SSH on your hosts all the time, because it's obviously an attack vector, and an attack vector is potentially liable to be attacked. But they've got security software that requires SSH to be enabled on the management interface. And so if they disable SSH, which is good security practice, their security software doesn't work. Now, whether that's a good idea or not, I'm not really here to discuss, but in order to be able to keep their security teams happy, they have to have SSH enabled. So rather than have this constantly nagging at them, we have this capability to ignore these findings. And so from here, let's just build an SSH ignore. We can give these filters any names that we like, and we'll just give it a description so we know what it's for. Kev Johnson said this is okay. And then we can apply this filter wherever we want. So we could apply it at a very high level, so we could apply it at a vCenter level. This is then going to ignore SSH across all of those things. Or we might want to say, let's say specifically, I think we've got a dev cluster here. So if we want to apply it just in this development cluster, we can then hit filter, and then that's going to build a filter, and it's going to stop reporting on SSH being enabled specifically for that development cluster. Now, you can build as many of these filters as you like, but generally what I'm going to recommend is if you turn these filters on, you should periodically review them. Because again, like I said at the beginning of this at the slides, what was secure 6 months ago doesn't necessarily mean it's secure now, just because even though the configuration is the same. So we can see here in this environment, we've built a lot of different filters. In fact, there's the one I've just created. Kev Johnson said this is okay. Now, I've applied this SSH ignore filter at this dev cluster level. Now, I might want to apply it somewhere else in the stack as well. So maybe I want to go to this vCenter 6.7 environment. I'm going to ignore it for the entire San Francisco data center. And then actually what I want to do is I want to ignore some other findings as well. So I want to ignore the warning about lockdown mode, because lockdown mode is one of these things where it seems like a really good idea until you've got to troubleshoot a failed ESXi host, at which point you've got to rebuild your ESXi host. And also we're going to ignore the finding for using Active Directory. And in fact, yeah, I'm not interested in PCI DSS for any of that stuff. So I'm going to turn off the PCI DSS checks just for those areas that I've filtered. So we can build pretty complex filters there. And then I hit update, and those are going to be reported, those will be reflected back into the findings. Now, what I'm actually going to do, because I've got too many filters in this environment as it is, I'm going to turn that off. So you turn it off, those filters are no longer applicable. I'm actually going to delete that filter as well. There we go. So that's the filter gone. And if we go back to security compliance, we should only turn on the filters or turn on the standards that we're particularly interested in. But each one of these standards has their own specific verbiage that they use. So when we start talking about DSA-STIG, what they talk about specifically is vulnerability IDs. So the auditors, if you're being audited for DSA-STIG compliance, what's likely to happen is the auditors will come to you and they'll say, okay, well, how are you handling vulnerability, in this case, V93977? Now, that doesn't really mean anything to anyone until you've got a tool like Runecast Analyzer that shows you, actually, yeah, this is a finding against here, and we can see, these are the main details. We need to configure the SSH daemon to provide additional assurance that remote login via SSH will require a password. So no passwordless logins, even in the event of misconfiguration elsewhere. So you can't log in without a password. And then we've got a check here, so we can say, okay, if we wanted to manually check this, we can SSH into that box because we turned on SSH on, and then we can run this specific command here. So we're going to look for the permit empty passwords parameter within etc ssh dconfig. We always provide you with a link to the source of the data as well. So in this case, it's the latest version of DSA-STIG. And then finally, we also give you the fix as well. So this is how you would fix this issue. You'd remediate it in that manner. PCI DSS. So PCI DSS talks about control IDs and milestones. So we can build filters here. If we want to filter, maybe we only want to look specifically at certain milestones, or maybe we want to only look at things that are relevant to vSphere. So we can build all of these filters again, and each of these screens have got that export capability. I'm not going to go through every single one of these standards, but for example, we've got things like here, make sure syslog is enabled. These are our findings. We've got these ESXi hosts where the config log output to syslog value is set to false. So it's not going to send anything to your syslog server. So nothing's going to a scene. As I say, all of the other standards are in here. They all have their own specific verbiage that they use, but hopefully you get the idea around that. The next thing I really want to show you is the hardware compatibility, and we get a lot of really good feedback about this. So the hardware compatibility side of things, what we're looking for is we're looking at everything that you've got in your environment. So we're looking across many vCenter servers, and then we're pulling all of the data from each of your ESXi hosts. We're pulling all of the data, including things like driver versions, firmware versions, BIOS versions, and then we're going to check them in real time against the VMware hardware compatibility list. So we can see here that a lot of these, we've got green checks, which means that they're good for the version of vSphere that they're running. But we've got some red warnings here. So this Antares ESXi 6.5 box, we've got a potentially incompatible configuration here because we're running a 2.8.0 BIOS version, which is not found on the HCL. Everything else on the HCL is good. Those servers are supported, the CPUs are supported, it's supported for the release of ESXi that we've got installed. But down here we can see this is the list of all of the supported BIOSes as coming from the VMware HCL. And if you want to double check any of that against the VMware HCL, we also have this HCL online button. So we can click here, and it'll take us to the VMware HCL for that exact box. So it's R730 for this version of ESXi. These are all the BIOSes that are supported. And as you can see, there is no 280. We're also going to do checks against the I/O devices. So the I/O devices, things like HBAs, network cards, these are the devices that typically cause issues in terms of hardware compatibility, and also cause issues in terms of purple screens of death. So if you're running driver versions or firmware versions that are not compatible, then you've got problems there. If we look in here, we can see we're running this driver version 691020. And so 691020 is on the HCL. We're good. We've not got a problem with that, but we are still flagged because we're running firmware 21.2.5, and the minimum supported firmware version for that driver is 21.3.4. So we know we've got a problem. We need to upgrade this firmware on this HBA in order to be compliant with the version of vSphere that we've got installed. We do the same thing for vSAN. So we look at the vSAN controllers. This box has got a vSAN controller. We can see that we've got this this specific P244BR. So again, we see them everywhere in HPE servers, running driver version 2030, and 2030 is listed on the HCL, so that's good. We're running firmware 688, which is also on the HCL, so we're good, but we're still seeing problems. And this is because we have to validate the exact versions of the firmware and the driver together. So if they're not on the HCL together, they're not supported, and we need to fix this. So we either need to upgrade the driver to 2044, or we need to downgrade the firmware to 660. So that's all good. That's checking against the versions that we've got now. And again, we've got this export capability, so you can see where your issues are with what you've got now. But where this really comes into its own is when we start looking at vSphere upgrades. Now, I don't know if all of you are aware, but vSphere 7 Update 1 was announced in Boston 2 days ago, in fact. So I'm expecting that's going to be coming out fairly soon because of the quarters and things like that. So once that comes out, then that's typically when a lot of enterprise customers start looking at, oh, well, maybe it's time to go to vSphere 7. Now there's an Update 1 release. So what we can do is we can do a check. At present, we can do it up to vSphere 7 because we can only work with the HCL that's public, and then we hit simulate. And we can check this across all of our various different servers, and we can see these 3 boxes down here that are running vSphere 6.7. Yeah, they're going to be fine. There's no problem there. We could go straight from 6.7 to 7 with those. But for the 6.0 and the 6.5 boxes, we have got some problems. And again, if we look at these R730s here, we can see we're running Dell BIOS 271. So 271 was supported with 6.5 and 6.7, but it's not supported for vSphere 7. So we need to upgrade this. So you're probably going to go to 210 or 211, and that will make you compliant. If we look at the I/O devices, sometimes these I/O devices are just not on the HCL at all, at which point it's like, well, okay, maybe I need to buy some new PCIe HBAs, or maybe I actually need to replace the server. Depends on how you're all configured in there. So we can see here, we only validate the firmware when we're looking at vSphere upgrades, because the driver versions, typically there's a new driver version either on your OEM image or on the actual VMware native image as well. So we can see here, we've got the firmware 21.3.5, we need 23.14.06. So we need to upgrade the firmware, but we don't have to replace the server yet, which means you can probably sweat it out for another 2 years or something like that. And then let's see if we can find a vSAN box. Yeah, we've got a vSAN box here. And again, it's the P244BR. And again, we can see we're running firmware 688, which was supported on 6.7, but it's not supported for vSphere 7. You must be running firmware version 7. So all of this is good because it means we don't need to replace any physical hardware, but we do have a little bit of work to do before we start doing these upgrades to vSphere 7. And again, once you've done this analysis, you can export and you can do an after, and that can really help you to identify where you're going to potentially need to, to replace that tin.
And also assuming, Kev, that some of this document, some of this information here you could export to, for documentation alongside, along
Absolutely.
lines of strategic projects, upgrades, etc., for evidence moving forward.
Absolutely. The ability to export that data is super important when you're making any kind of plans whatsoever. So, if you're potentially looking at, well, we actually need to, we're going to be adding another 200 staff, and we need to add some more hardware just to be able to deal with the extra workloads and things there. Then, what hardware are we potentially in a position where we're going to need to replace it within the next 6 months or something? So all of this is really, really important. And it's also really important when you start planning those upgrades. Now, I did mention about syslog. Now, we don't have anything this week, which is good because we've got no problems in our lab. But let's just, in fact, let's go. There we go. So we've got some KBs that have come up over the past month anyway. And if we look at these, we can see we've got issues, things like we've got an MULX network adapter. So we've got a flapping interface on there. If we scroll down to the bottom here, we can see in order to resolve this issue, we need to ensure that the drivers and firmware are compatible. So if we look at the findings, we can see it's come from this specific host here, this deneb 603. And this is exactly when that log was sent. So it was sent on the 6th of September. And this is the exact log entry. So we might have seen other issues at that time, especially if we're pushing storage across that adapter as well. But this helps to really identify these issues and helps you troubleshoot when you are having problems. And we've got other things here because not all of these can be picked up from configuration analysis. So we've got an issue detailed here, which is the improper termination of the packet capture user world agent. So this is an important part of ESXi, which allows you to do packet captures. But if you don't terminate that packet capture user world agent properly, what happens is you terminate the front end process and you think you've killed it, and then, okay, all well and good. But the back end process keeps capturing packets. And as you can imagine, the footprint of that gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually your ESXi host becomes entirely non-responsive. So there's nothing we can do to check for that, for the potential that that's happening from a configuration perspective, because you're just using the product wrong. But there's a knowledge base article that tells us what we need to do. And it also details, the kind of entries that we see in the VM kernel. So where we see those logs, we can correlate those and we can see we've had it happen twice. Again, it's on this deneb 603 host. So in fact, they both came from the same point in time. So we got this max worlds exceeded. We can correlate that against the KB, and we can show you what's going wrong. I've just got one other thing that I do want to very quickly show you. In fact, I've got two if I've got time. I'll be very quick on this. So one of the things we do get asked quite regularly is, is there anything we can do to actually help remediate, to get us to a better security posture? So we built this workflow for vRealize Orchestrator. I'm just going to quickly show you how this works. So what you may or may not be aware of is if you have a license for vCenter Server Standard, then you are licensed for vRealize Orchestrator. So chances are you just didn't know it if you're not using Orchestrator. We just need to select a security profile. So again, we'll just go with PCI DSS, for example, and then we need to select an object type. So we'll go with virtual machine in this case, but equally we could be remediating ESXi hosts, we could be remediating distributed port groups. And what's happening now is Orchestrator communicates with both the vCenter Server appliance and also with the Runecast Analyzer appliance. It's going to pull back a list of those objects that are impacted. And then from here, we can select in this list. So we'll just go down, we'll go we'll do a few of these. We could equally do all of them if that's what we wanted to do. Just hit accept. And then this list here gets populated. So these are all of the configuration items on the objects that we've selected that are not compliant with PCI DSS. So what we can do is we can remediate all of these. We might have reasons to not remediate all of them. Maybe some of them, if we were to remediate those specific settings, they're going to break something else in the environment. So obviously make sure you understand what you're doing when you do this. You hit accept, you hit submit, and then those virtual machines are going to be reconfigured to be PCI DSS compliant, just like that. And it takes seconds. And in fact, there should be a video up on our YouTube channel next week because I was making it earlier today, which is going to show you exactly how quickly we can go from a very, very non-compliant environment to a fully compliant environment in next to no time. That's the that's the VRO plugin. The last thing I want to show you very quickly is if you've got larger environments and you maybe need to deploy different Runecast Analyzer appliances for different security domains, or maybe you're a managed service provider and you want to deploy one per customer, we can use this enterprise console to convert one appliance into this kind of central management pane. And from here, we can see we're communicating with, we've got the local analyzer, which we're connected to, so that's great. But we've also got a North America and an Asia Pacific one. And we're pulling data across from all of the different sources of data that are connected to those as well. And we can see things like, okay, the last time we had data from them was 26 minutes ago. These are the versions of software that they're running, including the definitions. And if we want to drill through, we want to have a look specifically at the Asia Pacific one, we can single sign on through into that. That's probably everything I've got time to show you today. I'm just going to wrap things up very quickly here. So just to quickly show you, this is the kind of architecture that we have. So we have over here on the right-hand side, we've got the Runecast central repository. So we have this artificial intelligence that lives in the cloud, and it monitors all of these different sources of data. Whenever there's an update to any of those sources of data, we push these down to your appliance if your appliance is connected to the internet. If your appliance isn't connected to the internet, we push those updates to the Runecast portal as well. So you can download those and you can apply them out of band. The appliance then sits on premises, does all of the analysis. We've got the patented rules engine that lives in there. It's doing all of this pattern matching. It's doing all the artificial intelligence stuff in there. It's pulling data from vCenter. It could be pulling data from AWS. It could be pulling data from NSX Manager. All of that stuff is in there. But the important thing to understand is that everything happens on premises. The data stays on premises. No information about your services go outside of there. Very quickly, some business benefits. So we aim to save you time. We want to see your sysadmins going home on time. We want to see your sysadmins getting their weekends back so that they can have a family life. We want to help reduce outages, because outages, frankly, they cost time and money, but they suck. Nobody likes having to deal with them. So we're looking to identify in advance those things that are likely to cause you outages. We're looking to help you improve your security posture, because we can show you what you need to do to get to the place that you want to be, but also we can show you as soon as you start drifting away from that point as well. We're looking to help you minimize risk and give you that continuous compliance. Again, that kind of ties in with the improved security. And finally, just help you reduce costs, because if you've got things going on and you're having to pay your staff overtime to get things back up and running, anything that's not just ticking along nicely is likely costing you money. Whether it's costing you money that you can see going out to an external consultant to resolve an issue, or it's just costing you money because of lost staff productivity. All of that is bad. We want to help remove those risks from your environment. And on that note, I'm just going to turn it over. I'm going to grab a very quick mouthful of water and we'll see what questions we've got.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kev. That's really informative. It's great, overview of Runecast, the simplicity and the highlights that you get from it in terms of mitigating and highlighting those issues potentially exist. They do exist from within, an environment that grows organically. It changes daily, it changes hourly. We are bringing new services into the environments, Microsoft, VMware, HPE, lots of the manufacturers out there and the vendors that we work with daily. It's important that we mitigate and we close those attack surfaces before they become a problem.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
It's really good. We've got some questions that have come in. So the first question that I've got on the list is basically around sizing. So the appliance that we need, what compute and storage do we need to deploy within the environment?
Yeah, so that one, it really depends on the size of the environment. Really, we're a super lightweight appliance, so in what we would call a small environment. So a small environment we would say is up to 50 ESXi hosts. So in the kind of SMB market, that's probably quite a large environment, but we still do a small deployment. We need 2 vCPUs, 4 gig of RAM, and 120 gig of disk space. But obviously, everyone thin provisions the storage anyway, so you're going to consume whatever you need for your disk space. As you kind of go up in the size, then yeah, we can go a little bit bigger. I think the biggest one is 8 vCPUs and 32 gig of RAM. And just to give you some idea as to, you know, how that one performs. So our largest customer, again, they're also actually VMware's largest customer in Europe. They have an environment with something in the region of 13,000 ESXi hosts. Now, they don't use the log analysis feature of Runecast Analyzer. They just use it for configuration analysis. But they can get everything that they need from all of those almost 13,000 ESXi hosts with one large appliance. So, you know, it scales really, really well. If you have to scale out beyond that, then we've got the Enterprise Console feature, which gives you that visibility across many appliances as well.
Excellent. One other question is, my environment sits predominantly within Microsoft Azure space.
Mm-hmm.
Can Runecast scan this for compliance, and how would that work?
Yeah, so right now we can't. No. So we've got the coverage for vSphere. This includes VMware Cloud and AWS. We've got coverage for NSX, for Horizon, and we've also got the AWS coverage. Now, Azure is obviously a hot ticket, and you know, we'd be crazy to not be looking to support that. And as things stand at the moment, it's a roadmap item. We expect to deliver that very early in the new year. We're trying really hard actually to get it in before the end of this year, but there's a lot of engineering work that goes into that, and we've got quite an aggressive roadmap. So yeah, Azure will be coming in the new year, and also Google Cloud as well is also on there. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff as well.
Brilliant. Okay. One other question is, how long would a typical installation take, and what training can you provide in terms of platform support and features going forward?
Sure. So, I mean, in terms of how long does it take to deploy? The thing that generally takes the longest is downloading the appliance. So it depends on how fast your internet connection is, really. It's a 1.3, 1.4 gig appliance. You download that. It takes, I mean, we say 5 minutes. We say 5 minutes to do a deployment. It's a really easy to deploy appliance. It takes very, very little in terms of resources, and then you should be able to get actionable data out of it within another 5 minutes. So we tend to say kind of like 10 to 15 minutes from start to finish, you should be done. In terms of training, I mean, I'm in the process of making a bunch of videos that are showing some of the kind of more involved side of things like the vRealize Orchestrator plugin, for example. But in terms of the actual product itself, it's really, really simple to pick up. And this is one of my favorite things about Runecast Analyzer is, you know, I've worked with a number of other vendors' products, and it's like, okay, well, so for this monitoring tool, I mean, when I first started using Nagios, it took me about 3 months to actually get from, okay, I can deploy it, to, okay, I can actually get some useful data out of it. The great thing about Runecast Analyzer is it's built by sysadmins for sysadmins. So it's, you know, it's really, really super easy to pick up. We've got a really good user guide as well, but, you know, if you need some assistance with the actual getting up and running, then we've got great partners like Fortum IT, who I'm sure would be more than happy to help out there.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Kev. We'll definitely be more than happy to help. Reach out to us, and I will be providing my email address at the end of this session.
Awesome.
One other question that's just come in. How does Runecast fare against SolarWinds virtualization on a price and feature point?
I'm a techie, so I can't really speak to pricing because normally I'll just kind of like slurpy shoulder that across to one of my colleagues. So I can't really talk on that. The pricing, all I will say is it's very competitive. Our pricing model is based on the number of CPU sockets that you have. So it's pretty much the same model as ESXi up until November last year, when everything got a little bit more complex. But yeah, you just need to know how many CPU sockets that you're going to consume, and then we should be able to get you pricing. And again, Fortum can definitely help you there. In terms of features, now I'll be honest, it's been a long time since I've used SolarWinds Virtualization Manager, but from memory that was much more about kind of performance management, capacity management. It would pick up some issues like, okay, well, maybe you've got a network interface down, but it's a much more traditional monitoring tool, whereas what we're doing is very specifically about configuration, and you know, we do the log analysis as well, but the vast majority of what we do is the configuration. It's the proactive side of things. So, you know, things that you're not going to get picked up on in something like a SolarWinds Virtualization Manager or a vRealize Operations, that kind of thing. Hopefully that helps. But yeah, it's been a while, but from memory, it was more of a performance and capacity management tool than a configuration management tool.
Perfect, perfect. We'll just give another minute just for anyone else for any more questions that come in. My email address is lee.david@fortum-it.com. If there is anything else that crops up, following this webinar, feel free to reach out, drop me an email, and myself in conjunction with Kevin, be happy to answer any future questions.
Absolutely.
Excellent. I don't think we've got any more questions for the moment.
It doesn't look like it.
No.
Brilliant. Well, thanks everyone for your time. I really appreciate it, and thanks Lee for having me as well. It's always great to be able to speak to folks. It gives me something to do from the home office, as you can tell. I'm not in a corporate office, so it's good to have some focus. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening and sticking all the way to the end as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Excellent. Cheers. Thank you.
Bye bye.